So I'm a web developer, obviously, and so one of the things I found out when I wanted to move and start doing mobile apps is there's a lot of options for making mobile apps. And it is very hard, I think, to find which one is really the right one for to choose, based on my background and my interest levels and what platform I use the most and things like that. There's just a ton of questions. And we're going to hit a lot of these topics tonight and hopefully steer you toward NativeScript. And but I want you to have a solid foundation of why you would want to choose NativeScript, because there are a lot of options out there, and I want you to at least have a foundation of making sure that you're in the right category path for yourself. Because you are Angular people, which I'm presuming you are, and I am not, by the way, but because you are Angular folks, I'm assuming there are some really, really good reasons why you should think about NativeScript, and we'll be covering that tonight, okay? So a couple of the major things we're gonna do tonight are talk about 2 secrets for being a more valuable JavaScript developer or consultant. And so if anybody wants to get a better job, make more money, be a better consultant, we're going to cover 2 little secrets that a lot of folks don't seem to know. And then we're going to focus just on mobile apps and talk about 3 different pathways for creation of mobile apps. They aren't the only ways. There are some that are like Microsoft Office type of products that a secretary could do. But we're going to cover the big developer ones. And most of the other products, specific named ones that you might see on the market, actually come from one of these, usually, or has a similar design behind the scenes. And with some of the products that are out there, it's really hard to figure out how are they made, what's really happening behind the scenes, how efficient is it, or how hard or easy might it be for you to learn. So we're going to cover that. And one of the things we're going to talk about is about creating Android and iOS apps with one code base. So instead of spending money on an iOS person and an Android person, we're going to first of all focus on us, web people, and 2, writing it once and having it work on 2 platforms, and to do it efficiently, okay? And 3 little words I like is flexible, free, and easy to start with, okay, and to learn. So I usually find those pretty easy when you're starting something new, is that it has those features, okay, especially the free and the easy to learn, okay. The URL for the slide deck is up here, and it's also on the board in the middle. It's not required. Here's a little bit more about me. I've been doing web stuff for a long time. Of course, I started with Microsoft Technologies back in the day and ran many user groups for .NET. But I love PHP. Laravel's a favorite of mine. Love all data sources. Couch, which I mentioned just a second ago, one of my latest NoSQL databases that I love. Not only have I worked as a developer for the federal government and private industry, I also have taught quite a bit. I've taught at the graduate school in the District of Columbia, Georgetown, GW. At those 3 locations, I've actually developed certification programs as well. They're usually very focused, so I never just wrote it once and had everybody use the same one, because I don't like doing that. So I made everybody's very specific. Like GW's was very database specific. So, and the graduate school, since they have more federal clients, we covered all the federal regulations for web developers and did some really neat stuff. I've also done some for the military as well, for the Air National Guard, and so I love customizing the training. Last few years I've been doing a lot of coaching and consulting. Anybody heard of Main Streets before? They help local businesses, and of course the small ones need a lot of help, so I enjoy helping them improve their processes. I've also worked as a consultant for the Greater Washington Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, and fixed a lot of people's emails and DNS issues for some reason. I do a lot of volunteer work. Not only have I run a lot of user groups, I help Microsoft set up their worldwide support structure for user groups to get organizations started. And I also do it at co-working companies as well, like a mentorship. It makes a lot of fun. You meet new people. They ask very interesting questions usually. So currently, my current projects is I'm working on a training for NativeScript, actually, to really jumpstart the process for understanding the true foundation, okay? So it'll be without Angular. It'll be just the foundation of it. And then classes after that will have other options available in it, okay? Okay. Here are 2 secrets. I'm assuming that everybody in here knows HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Pretty easy, right? And what some people may not know is those same skill sets can actually help you do desktop apps and mobile apps, okay? The mobile apps are what we're going to focus on most of the time tonight, but people also don't know about the desktop apps. Has anybody heard of that before? A couple of you? Okay. A few of you, at least 3 of you have. And so I just listed them here just to kind of have a nice complete talk. The concept of using web skills to do desktop apps, same concept, web skills to do mobile apps, okay? Notice that what I list as web skills, what's missing from that line at the very top? HTML, and I replaced it with XML instead to be a little more vague, a little higher level, right? Because HTML specifically covers only web stuff, okay? So a lot of the technologies that we're going to briefly go over tonight actually have other XML languages for handling the user interface layer, okay? So these are the 2 technologies that they're the only 2 I know of out there, and they have both changed names in the last 2 years. And I didn't have the time to go back and figure out what those names were because they're totally different. Anyway, talking about the desktop apps. Is anybody here a Microsoft developer? Oh, we do have some. Oh, wow. Very good. What kind of editors do you folks use when you do your web development? What kind of IDEs, integrated development environments, or editors do you use? Just name a few.
Visual Studio.
You actually use Visual Studio. Do you use this product or one of the others?
VS Code.
You use this one? Okay. How about you?
VS Code. VS Code.
Does anybody use anything besides this product?
I use Visual Studio.
Oh, what? Oh, that's cool. How about you?
2015. VS 2015. Yeah, I use.
Oh, the other,
I use regular
the not the real one, right? Okay. All right. What? Nobody uses TextMate or whatever that is? Okay. Anyway. Does anybody see anything funny about this? This is an editor that a lot of people use. And when I first saw this, because I used to have the real Visual Studio product, very expensive product, mind you, but Microsoft gave them to me because I ran all their Mid-Atlantic user groups. So when I saw this, I was extremely puzzled. What hits you guys funny about this slide?
Cross-platform.
Cross-platform. Well, anybody that lived through the era where Microsoft wrote Office suites for the Mac lived through a really rough time in our lives, right? Okay. So in other words, to see this happen, you really wondered what in the world is this all about. So this to me means what? Microsoft is not using Microsoft technologies to write this editor. Anybody know what they used?
Electron.
It's actually Electron is what they used for that. So it's not just small companies doing this. Microsoft's using the technologies too. Okay. So back to the mobile apps. A lot of people, when they say, oh, we're going to do this mobile app and we have to get an iOS developer in here right away. And then we'll do that Android thing next year maybe, or whenever we get extra money to spend, right? And so the big issue with that is, first of all, the Android never happens. And because it's so cost prohibitive, it's expensive the first time, and who wants to write the same thing twice, right? And more than likely, they probably have a website, so they already have the web thing built, and they did the web independent of the iOS. And so the Android just never happens a lot of times, okay? And because it's too expensive. Makes a lot of sense to me. So when consulting with companies, I promote the other options here, okay? It's more cost effective, it's faster, and we can reuse our web skills. Web developers, we don't quite make as much money as the Java people most of the time. But with this stuff, you can actually learn more skills, so you can make more money. So let's cover the first one, B, the hybrid. This is the one that's been out the longest. And this concept is that we're using, honest to goodness, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And we are able to create an application that can be sold in the stores of the Apple and the Android environments. That's our whole goal of all of our apps, right? Otherwise, we'd use a mobile or a web technology. However, what happens in the hybrid environment is, since it's HTML, it has to be web. So what happens is when that gets packaged up to be sold in the libraries, or in the stores, excuse me, it will have to use a headless browser. So in other words, there's the operating system. On top of that will be the browser. You don't see the browser stuff, but it's there, and it's taking up processing, okay? And then the people see what's being shown inside that headless window, okay? And one product on that actually is Iconic Framework. Has anybody used that? One, okay. And my understanding is that they like Angular as well, right?
Yep.
Cool. The only issue with that is that besides the huge Iconic and Angular in there, you also have a headless browser taking up memory and space and everything else, okay? And it's not very flexible. In other words, I can't go in and change, I can't use another framework very easily. It's a very highly opinionated environment, okay? But that's just one product that happens to use them. The hybrids are mostly based on these products right here. Adobe bought a Canadian company, and that's what they focused on, was writing a system where you write it once, and it can automatically create the other two apps for you, all using web technologies. Very nice. When Adobe bought that company, they also open sourced it, so it's now an Apache project as well. Anything that Adobe makes can be used with the other product and vice versa. Nice little ecosystem, isn't it? Okay, but remember, it uses all the web skills. The problem is that it uses the extra layer of the browser. So it's not very efficient. Okay, so here we are, we're talking about the third option for doing mobile apps. First of all, notice we've got not the HTML, but we have the XML. May or may not have CSS and JavaScript again. The nice difference here is the cross-platform native apps do not use the browser layer, okay? So they run a little more natively. So that huge layer of an entire another app running is out of there, okay? And I've got just 4 examples. These are different development tools for developers like yourself. The first one is Flutter. Has anybody heard of that one? That's a Google product. I looked at it. It requires a lot of typing. Do you think that as well? It seems like...
You have a UI layer, so it's all in code.
Yeah, so when you make a box, and then you make another box, you're instantiating it and appending it to the bottom of whatever else is before it. So if you've done JavaScript and made buttons on the page manually, that's what that's like. It's not friendly, I don't think. But it's cross-platform, by the way, which is kind of cool. React Native, very popular. Also the UI layers, it's a little bit better than the Flutter, but it's still a lot of work in my opinion, okay? My 2 favorites I have highlighted, of course. Fuse Open is a very nice layer. They have their own XML language that uses JavaScript, just like you're familiar with. They don't use CSS, however, which I'm kind of a fan of. But it's really easy to get started with, and it's free and open source as well. It's kind of fun if anybody wants to play with it. And that used to be owned by a company, and now it's all open source, including the integrated development environment. But it's got some nice benefits. This one is actually focused on using the graphics CPU. So in other words, if you have a customer that wants the same UI on both platforms, that's a nice one. Or if you've got visual things that are moving around on the screen or doing crazy stuff, okay? The UI stuff is really wild. Matter of fact, they've got some examples on their website where it's just, You know, instead of having the globe spin, they do crazy stuff, you know. It's fascinating. Extra navigation things, it's pretty wild. But it's very performant because it uses the graphics processor, uses OpenGL as a base. Okay. Our last one is NativeScript. This is what we're going to talk about tonight mostly. It is promoted by a company called Progress. They have open source this product. Okay. And you'll see a lot. Most of it's just free and available to use. Here's some of the benefits to using your web skills for mobile apps. Of course, writing it once and having it work in 2 platforms, that's pretty nice. Easier learning curve, you could possibly use the same technologies that you've already been using. So the same rules apply. You might even be able to use some of the same tools, maybe the same editor if you like. So these are some of the things you want to evaluate when you look at a new one. And all these are obviously very good in NativeScript. That's why we're covering them right now. Reduce the development costs. Instead of hiring a bunch of developers, 3 different developers, web, iOS, and Android, you can hire just maybe 2 web people that might want to learn some new technologies. It's easier to integrate with the web, and especially with your Angular knowledge. I don't know much about it, but Alex does. And I've also got links to some slides from the company that will tell you more about doing that if you want to share components, I believe they're called. Okay. It's also easier for maintenance. There's just one technology and not 2 or 3. It's very simple. Okay. As a longtime educator and somebody that likes to play with a lot of different technologies and try new things, there's some things I look for in the beginning. And here's my list. I want to be able to install the thing. Imagine that. Has anybody tried Android development with Java on a Windows machine? How is your installation progress? Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And when it doesn't, it's not fun to debug, okay? It's just crazy. Actually, Iconic used to be that way too. They might have improved over the years, but in the beginning, it was really hard to get Iconic to work.
It's Ionic.
Ionic, right, sorry. Ionic. Iconic's an IDE developer, or a GUI product. Thanks. So that's one thing to think about is the installation. We're going to see how easy it is for NativeScript development. It's phenomenal. The extensive coding, you know, how hard is it to do the UI layer? We want an XML language to make this stuff easier. And what's nice about this is you'll see that there is one language that works for both platforms. So they've made their own language that just gets translated on the fly. Cool. You know, the flexibility, the versatility, extensibility. If you're familiar with using JavaScript libraries to do something on the web, can you still use them? Or do you have to convert to something that you're being mandated to use? That's something you might want to think about. The very last one is extensibility. What happens when there's the next version of iOS or Android? Do you get to use it tomorrow? Or do you have to wait for an entire development cycle from your developer tools to be able to access that data? Okay? And in a perfect world, we get to use it immediately, right? And some platforms provide that. NativeScript does. Okay. Testing. Sometimes when people are doing testing, for instance, you know, some of those packages where you, like a secretary, can sit down and write a little app for the Android or the iOS platform, and they've got a little test. You know, here's where you get to play with it, and here's where you get to view it as an app. Those are simulated, right? They aren't real, and sometimes to get a real app to test it on a real device with a certain size screen or a certain piece of hardware might be challenging, okay? And so that's something that you want to have is you want a real test environment so you get to see it on the actual devices. The other thing is we do a lot of, sometimes through the development phases, we do silly stuff like change colors and words because somebody important is telling us what to change. And of course, when we make the change, they want to see it on their device right away. And sometimes that updating process can be a nightmare. Okay, it might take a lot of time. You'll see how NativeScript does it, and it's very cool. Very easy. Okay. Here's an overview of NativeScript. It's an open source framework. It makes real native, not web stuff. It makes real native mobile apps with JavaScript as the programming language, and there's no headless browser layer. Okay? We use the web skills like JavaScript, TypeScript, cascading style sheets, and we can also take advantage of some frameworks. The two that they like are Angular and Vue. Okay? And a year ago, this list was a lot shorter. It only was Angular, okay, because they started with Angular and the two JavaScript and TypeScript. The community got together and said, we want Vue framework too. They worked on it for a while, and now it's part of the product line. So that means it's written enough to be changed and to be augmented to use other things. So if somebody really has a need, they can go to town with it. Okay. The last one is from one code base, make both of them, and make sure that they're the native UI, not something that was written in HTML and just looks like it's that. Here's some of the history of the adoption. Prototypes in 13, and this is a quote from the company, not me, is that there was mass adoption in 17, excuse me. And so that's already been a couple years. Here is just from 2016 to December 2017. These are downloads per month of it. So that's increasing. And this is just 26 and 2018. And as of last month, there's the number for the NativeScript, 2 million, okay? So that's a lot of people. Here's a summary of the reasons that we're actually using the true UI. We're not using HTML and playing with CSS so it looks like it. Because what's the problem with that? Our buttons may look right, but there's other things involved, such as the back thing in the upper left-hand corner of your iOS app. Don't have that in Android. So there's a lot of monkey business that you'd have to be doing if iOS do this, if Android do that, right? And in most of these technologies, they've taken that away from you, and it's just automatic. So it makes our life a lot easier as developers. Okay. Maximum code reuse. You can even use Sass, which I think is kind of amazing. Anybody here use Sass for their stuff? Nice. Cool. Okay. Some technologies tell you exactly every step you need to make. NativeScript doesn't do that as much. They've kind of got some of the rules that you have to follow, but you can deviate. So instead of using JavaScript, you can use TypeScript, if your developers are familiar with that, or you could use the other two real frameworks for the UI. And you can pretty much use any other framework as long as that framework doesn't require using an HTML DOM, because there's not one, okay? So there are at least 3 videos on the concept of sharing code between the web and mobile, and I presume that you guys will all want to see this. Your talk was on that a couple months ago, right?
Yeah.
And so here's one of the links. My suggestion is you do what I did and do this, and you'll get 3 nice videos out of it, okay? And you can look in the archives and see his presentation, okay? So there's a webinar that they did just a couple months ago too that was updated. Okay. Remember, we're using JavaScript. JavaScript really doesn't run native iOS stuff, right? And it doesn't do Java either. So what happens is we use something in JavaScript looking language and it gets converted to the other languages, okay? That's the whole neat thing, and that happens automatically for us. So we just learned something that looks pretty familiar to something we've already seen with JavaScript, and it gets converted for us. The same thing happens. Remember, this is the button. The right, of course, is iOS. Notice it has the back on it. And over here, we don't have a back button. Notice that our buttons are different platforms. And they are not fake buttons. They may not do anything, but they are created by the same UI that all native UI apps do. It's not a CSS pretend thing going on. Okay? And up here's the code. Okay? So there's an XML language. It runs pretty much like JavaScript. A little more, it's more aligned with the XML syntax rules. So if you forget to close tags every once in a while, you're going to have a little bit of a problem, but it's pretty easy to correct. NativeScript also has some features are not built into it, and so you might need to use some extra plugins. And here we are with the plugins. Notice that the camera localization, what's that, says pager? Not sure what that is, but there's other features that other people have used and wanted to run on the two platforms. Okay, this is where you can go get extra code and install it into your application. Okay, the reason these aren't built in is that would just bloat the daylights out of your app. Okay, just the basics are built in. Everything else you just supplement as needed. Okay, and all three of the options that we're going to show for developing in NativeScript can use these plugins, which is nice. Notice there's also templates. I'm going to show that to you live here a little bit. Okay, there's actually some other repositories that are very common for code that is unique to Android versus iOS. You can use those too. Might require a little bit more work, but you can get them to function. And of course, if you want to have both Android and iOS apps, you have to get code from both of them. Yeah. Here's the community. Of course, the website has a forum. That's pretty nice. They also have a Slack channel. And as of February, Valentine's Day, actually, there were 10,000 people on that channel, almost double from whenever the original screenshot was taken. I'm not sure when that was. Yeah. Number 5, this is supported by a major company. Okay, it's kind of nice to have a major corporation behind these things, and they've got a history of creating components for developers, mostly ASP.NET. Telerik is also a name that's associated with this parent entity. And so not only do they do a lot of NativeScript stuff and web stuff, they also now have Progress Kinvey, which is a server-side kind of database, and it's kind of like writing serverless apps. So of course it works for the mobile, but it also works for the web. So like it can do authentication without knowing any server-side stuff. Progress, since they're really well known for doing UI elements, they have a whole bunch of enhanced things that can work with NativeScript. Some of them are provided for free, but they've also got some to buy, obviously. Okay, but the whole basics of the UI, scrolling things and lists of things, that's all built in. That's just basic foundation. Okay, but they do have some crazy stuff you can see too. They actually have some crazy stuff that's free as well. Pretty interesting, like displaying data in charts and things. Pretty nice. Now for a corporation, they have an extra piece to this. This is, of course, where they make some money, is everything we've seen pretty much is free except for maybe some of the advanced components. But they also provide corporate level support. It's nice, a corporation that has clients asking for stuff, needing support, they can pay for it and get it. Okay? It's nice to know that that's available. Okay? When you start to do mobile app development with NativeScript, there are 3 major ways to get started, which is kind of nice. Nice flexibility. If you're a crazy typer and like to do command line interface stuff, you can obviously do that. We've got a little sample on the next slide so you can just see it. If you're into the CLI or like reading books, I suggest you get the free book, and I'll show you where that is on the website when we get to the web. But his book not only covers the basic foundation of the product line and how it works behind the scenes, which is nice, it also covers a lot of the CLI stuff. The book is also good for absolutely everybody because he does cover a lot of the good stuff. You just get to ignore all the command line typing, which is nice. The second one is a desktop app. It is cross-platform, obviously, runs on all 3 major platforms, and it's just a GUI. And it does the same thing as a CLI, okay? Notice the CLI does not have an editor, and neither does the Sidekick. Okay, so it's editor agnostic. So whatever you like as an editor, it's fine, okay? The VS Code slide that we saw from Microsoft earlier actually has a lot of good plugins to make your life easier for making your code type faster, and it can validate the XML from the NativeScript UI. So those are pretty nice. But you don't have to use it if you don't want to. One of the issues with doing cross-platform development, especially for Windows developers, is they can never make an iOS app on their machine. Okay? Big problem, right? Some of this has been fixed by other companies. Like Intel used to do it in the cloud for everybody, which is a really nice deal. They don't have that product anymore, which is too bad. But Sidekick has mimicked it now. If you use the Sidekick app, you can actually send it up to the cloud with all its little pieces and then download something you can put in the iOS store. That's pretty nice for Windows folks. Okay. It also has some debugging stuff in it as well. My favorite, it's highlighted, is the Playground. This is a free IDE, no login required. It's a URL play.nativescript.org, and it's an integrated development environment. It's got your editor, Windows Explorer, not Windows Explorer, but an Explorer for files and things. And we're going to be looking at that here in a minute. Here's an example of the command line interface, making an app, a folder for an app called My App. If you want to use a template, those are two of the template apps, and there's a bunch of templates, by the way. And we'll look at the website for that in a minute. And then you can add your platform. You don't have to do both at the same time. You could do one or the other, whatever. So this could also be used for maybe doing a third one in the future. And remember, the book has got a lot of that in there. But this is also a nice way to do the same thing, the desktop app. Notice there's no there's no folder view, there's no integrated development environment, but it does a lot of other stuff. The templates, obviously. And notice those are all JavaScript. I can't remember if I did. They will all have these options here for you. Oh, and now view. This is an old screenshot. We'll have view now as well. Cool. Oh, and by the way, that's not for testing on the right. It's just a picture, okay? Not real. The testing for all three of these is going to be the same as what I'm going to show you. You can use local stuff, like if you have an Android emulator, you can use those, but we're going to show you real life stuff. It's a lot of fun. Okay. Here's the Playground, which is the one in the cloud. So you can be doing it right now if you open it up. play.nativescript.org if you've got access, and no login required. You can just start playing with stuff. One of the first things it's going to tell you is that you can download testing apps to your iOS or Android device. Okay, it just helps you test things without having the store in the middle, you know. That's the major part of it. On the right, of course, the regular editor. Of course, it IntelliSenses and everything like that, and color coordinates. And you can see this is pretty much an XML language. There are tags, open and close elements, attributes. All attributes are followed by an equal sign and a value inside of single or double quotes, so they just have to match. You know, all the good old XML rules. Pretty simple. Even comments are, of course, the same. Over here on the left is the Explorer view of the file structure of everything. So you can see that there's a root folder with files inside of it. What's kind of interesting about this environment is that they actually separate files. So they have an XML file, a CSS file, and a JS file. Okay? And then you'll notice as we go through this, is that they actually refer to those just by the name that prefaces it. So right here, it'd be home-page. They just access that. There's no file. They don't use the file extension, because what it does is it's all three of those put together. Okay? Cool. Down here in the bottom left are some components that you can drag and drop. As a teacher, I prefer typing them in because then you know what's happening. When you drag and drop some of these, they edit multiple files that you cannot tell have been edited except for ones that are opened, which I find to be dangerous. Plus, there are some advanced components in here that are not foundation components from the documents. A little tricky when you're trying to figure out what's going on. Let's see. Okay. That's just a summary of the 5 things that we covered earlier. Any questions on those? Which is all in one slide. Cool? This was from them, not me. All right, so we're going to take a look at some stuff. Oops. Okay. First place to start out with is, of course, the documents. It's where you go to learn everything after you play around in the playground area. This is where they'll talk about different ways to install, of course. But down here, they'll talk about the Angular, the core, and then the Vue.js implementations. Okay? So when you look at the NativeScript core, it will cover JavaScript and TypeScript at the same time. It's just tabbed. It's pretty simple. But these are where you find all the core widgets. Okay? So we'll talk about the UI widgets for the elements on the page, the buttons, and that kind of stuff, the images. And then, of course, there's the layouts as well. And, of course, they're all focused on mobile app development. Okay. Yeah. Let's see. Under the Developers tab, which is also on the other website, has the playground, which is what we're going to look at here in just a moment. We've got code samples, and that is just a crazy place with a lot of nice samples for us. And you can sort by what framework or what language you're going to be using. Notice here on the left, frameworks, you're going to get them all, or do you want just Angular? And what do you kind of thing you're looking for? I want to see what kind of layouts it has. And you can go through here and see all the demos and see what languages they're available in. So if you want one that's in all 4 of them, you can find those pretty easily. Let's see. When you click on these, it'll actually open up a playground for you. So you can start working with it right away. So notice up here it's got a URL. Those URLs you can send to people. They're all shareable, which is pretty nice. If you log in, the URLs are a lot longer. Probably has a GUID in there or something, for safety and security. But in here, what they do is a lot of people when they post questions on forums or have an issue that they want to talk about, if they're good people, they will go ahead and make a little demo app, very simple demo app for everybody to look at. It makes it easier to provide support to folks. So it's pretty nice. Okay. Let's take a look at some of the items up here. Notice up here, it says A for Angular. It just tells you what framework's being used or what language is being used. Here's the name they gave it. You can click on it and change it if you like. It's pretty simple. You can create a new one, and notice those are the 4 options: JavaScript, TypeScript, Vue, and Angular. Okay, it'll just open up a blank one. QR code. Now this is fun. This is how you test. One way you can test. This isn't the only way. This is the fun one that you can do on your device. There's 2 apps by Telerik, which is a company that they acquired. You install it on your machine, and then, actually, I don't know if I can, And you open it up, and it looks like this. Very simple. It's got one option. It says scan a QR code. And you go ahead and do this. And then it actually opens up a different app. And you'll see it up here. Might take it a minute. There it is. Okay, everybody see it? Pretty simple, just like what you saw. And you can also see that this is my LG device and blah, blah, blah. You can see some log data. I don't know anything about this app here that they did, but it obviously did something. I'm not sure what that does. But you can do console.write stuff, logging to that, and it tells you which device it is and stuff. So if got a lot of people connected, it's pretty nice. If you do changes to it and hit save, ooh, what is that? Oh yeah. They're letting you know that there is the command line interface. Do you know which button I should push?
You can hit the X.
Oh, the X. Oh, thank you. Didn't see that. Alrighty. Of course, it's not updating. Half the tests I did in here today, it worked. Some didn't. Say what?
That's a login page or login component. I think you're looking at the file.
Oh, I am. Thank you. Actually, I'm going to go in here. This is the normal change I do. This is a root level CSS. See, it changed to dark. It's my normal thing. Don't know why I used their code when I had one opened already in another tab, but I did. So we're going to go over the file structures over here, but there's a basic set of CSS that's involved, and it always starts with light. You can change it to dark. You can change the file on it. It's the same as CSS, okay? And you can see that they've added, not only are they starting with a basic theme, but then they've added a couple of extras that they like, okay? All right. And notice that we can also download the files. Actually, I'm not going to do that. But you can download the files and then use them in one of the other two environments if you want. So in other words, you could play with the CLI or the GUI app if you want. Okay. Ready. Ready. Okay, we talked about the plugins already. Okay. They do have the links on the screen, but it's kind of hard to click on those on your phone, because one's on screen, one's on the phone. So if you decide to search for NativeScript, the playground, just make sure that the developer is correct. Telerik. And of course, it's the same for the iOS. Okay. And it will download two apps. One is actually just to scan the QR code, and then it sends it off to the other one to actually run whatever code you've got. Okay. And it actually was about 6 months ago or so ago. You had to actually do some steps to get it to update, and it's all automatic now. It's pretty nice. Okay. Let's see. Alrighty. Okay. If you want to, you can also look at a couple of the little very easy demos. We actually did what I normally do with those two demos we just did with that other example. The only thing new in this is the accounts. Remember that if you actually sign up for Playground, you can actually store all your files up in the cloud, which makes it kind of nice. Okay, and you can actually import NPM packages up into the cloud as well from the plugin stuff that we saw earlier. So makes it pretty nice. Any questions on that? Okay. Cool. Here's my little thank you screen. Okay. If you have any questions, just feel free to drop me an email. I'm new to this technology. I've been just using it since November timeframe, but working on that documentation takes a while to write training materials. Question?
Maybe because you're new to this, you might not know the answer to this question, but when you are scanning the QR code, and not necessarily from the Playground, but even if you have your developer tools and everything central to your computer, how do we guarantee that the compiled code does not that only goes straight to your phone on the application? Like, what routes does it take to get to your phone? Especially if you have a lot of...
There was a really neat article on that, on how that works. And I just saw it over the weekend, I think it was.
It's on the NativeScript blog. It just came out a few days ago.
Awesome.
So it'll answer some of your questions, but directly to answer, it doesn't go up through their servers.
Right.
So any changes you make is not going to be secure. Don't put any security.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's what I was wondering about.
And it uses a third-party company for the publish and subscribe part of it, which I thought was pretty wild. Yeah. It's got to be crazy because, you know, I usually when I do this, especially if I'm writing documentation, I have like a couple of little devices, a couple of medium devices, maybe a larger one if I can get my hands on one or have one at the office with me. And when you hit save, it's fun to see them all change, you know?
Yeah, the playground is mostly it's to play around with it, to kind of build the UI and see what it looks like. But if you want to develop secure applications, you should use the CLI.
Of course, yeah.
But also, even if you use the other two methods, they can still use that scanning thing to view it on your app.
Right, so
If
that's
you-
what I was asking, if the NPM package that you install to be able to, you know, port the compiled code to your device, when you use the NPM packages, is it just a straight shot over the Wi-Fi to your phone? Do you have to connect it directly to your...
I don't think it uses Wi-Fi.
Right.
It's going to go through their service.
It goes through their service. So for instance, and tell you, I've been to a place that did that used the Wi-Fi, and let me tell you where that's not fun, is if you're in two different buildings or two different countries. You know, you're here and the UI person's somewhere else. It's a nightmare. And that Fuse product used to do it that way. I think they've changed it since I used it last, but it was really, I mean, until you had the problem, you didn't know that there was an issue there, you know? But I understand your point. But you remember that when you're working with the other two options, number 1 and 2, the CLI and the desktop app, you can use local emulators and things if you want. So that wouldn't even transport it to a phone.
Awesome.
I would bet you could do it. I don't even have an interest in trying that. So, but I'm sure that you could probably do it. Transfer it through a cable, I would guess.
Yeah, so if you plug, like if you have a real device
Yep.
and you don't want to use the emulator,
Mhm.
you can just plug your USB device, either Android or
Yeah.
iOS, into a computer and it doesn't even go anywhere, it just goes directly to
That's what I wanted.
But that works for iOS too, does it? Okay. I knew Android does, but I didn't know iOS did.
Awesome. Thank you.
Cool. Any other questions I can help with? Alrighty. Did you learn anything new? Anybody going to go home and play with it? Super easy to do. Yeah. Cool. Thank you.